Good evening. Thanks again for joining us tonight, everybody. I have to tell you, tonight is another one of those nights I'm in awe of who is joining me tonight. Chris Fabry has been a favorite of mine since many, many years ago when we were both, 10 years old again. Him writing his first book, me reading it, but Dogwood was the one that got me hooked on his writing many years ago. And since then, I have had the pleasure of reading them all. And I'm not even sure how many there are. I was going to count or ask him. We'll have to ask him tonight. So, but if you didn't know, Chris Fabry from Chris Fabry Live on Moody Radio every day from Monday through Friday. You can see him there, but he is also a Christie Award winner. He has written numerous books along with children's books that he has done with Jerry Jenkins. And he's done some movie renditions or remakes of books, or books made out of movies. With the Kindigs. So he has got a long pedigree of fiction books. So I'm excited to see. Hi, Chris.
I'm here. I'm here.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Did you say I have a pedigree? Does that make me a dog?
No, it's a wonderful thing. Authors should all have pedigrees.
Glad to hear it.
So, and you know what? Well, I'm thinking about how many fiction books have you written?
I'm working on my, I think A Piece of the Moon was number 83.
Really?
Total books, yes.
Okay.
Books for adults, probably about a dozen of those.
Wow.
Including the movie novelizations. Yeah. But I wrote a lot of children's books. I wrote 35 books with Jerry Jenkins and Dr. Tim LaHaye, Left Behind series. And then Jerry and I did another 20 together in 2 different series. So we wrote like 55 books together, and that took a while.
That's a great experience too. And I would love to have been a bug on the wall while you two were talking. So so
it was really, I got my education in writing from Jerry. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without him, because I met him at Moody Bible Institute, and I hosted a program called Open Line. And I would have Jerry on every time he published a book, which was like every 2 weeks, And so I would say to him, hey, what about this idea? And I would show him my writing. And he said, look, at one point he said, look, if you want to do this, I can help you, but it'll be painful. And I didn't know what he meant, but I just said, bring it on. Tell me. And so I remember him editing my first stories, manuscripts, and they would come back. And I got the feeling that, he marked it up so much, this can't be any good, but he kept doing it. And so I got the feeling that he believed in me enough to hang with me, and, he wanted to work with me. And then doing the children's books was just an education in itself. I got paid for doing that, but I learned so much about self-editing and writing. It was a great education. So I thank Jerry every chance I get.
Well, that's awesome. Wow. And things I didn't know. So, I knew about your kids' books, and my kids did read some of them. So, they kind of aged up above it, but we carry them here yet. So, yeah, the kids are still reading them, which tells you how good they are. If you haven't read them, please do. They're wonderful. So, but now to circle back to why we're really here. Not that those aren't great stories, but why don't you tell us a little bit about The Piece of the Moon? A Piece of the Moon.
A Piece of the Moon, yeah. I'm sure we'll get the title. By the end of the hour, we'll get the title down. Don't worry about it. This is a story that came to me when I was thinking about Forrest Fenn. Forrest Fenn is he passed away in the last year. He was a man who had an idea of getting people out in nature. He wanted them to go out and hike and breathe the air and clean air. And so he decided to hide a treasure in the Rocky Mountains, somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. He lived in New Mexico. And he wrote a long poem that gave clues to where he hid it. And people would come from all across the country. They would read this thing, and some of them got into trouble. Some of them got injured. There was at least one man who died, who fell from a bridge. And so it was this story that I sent it to my editor, Karen Watts. I said, Karen, I think there's something about this would make a really good story. And she said, well, yeah, it's got a hook to it. It depends on what you do with it. And so over a series of months and then a couple of years, I fleshed out this story of this old guy named Gideon Quigley, who had been been with NASA. He'd made a lot of money because he was good not only at keeping the astronauts alive, but also in making money and investing. And so he had amassed this fortune, and he hears from God one day that he's supposed to take his fortune and hide it in the hills and use the Bible verses as clues to find the treasure. And so his MO is, I want people to read the Bible. Instead of going out in nature, I want people to read the Bible again. So there ensues this, people who are saying he's just crazy. There's no treasure out there. He's making all this up. He's doing the bait and switch. But some people actually believe him. So the story begins with kind of that backstory, and you don't know what happened to the treasure or if it's even really there, but you know that he has this feeling that God has told him to do this. Whether that's true or not, as the reader, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's how the story starts. And I didn't know where to set it other than, hey, I'm from West Virginia. People say that my stories come alive when I tell stories about the people that I grew up with, the people that I know. And so I set it in a little town called Emmaus, West Virginia, a very biblical name. And I set the main story in a little country and western radio station there, Country 16. I never give the call letters that would start with a W, but I grew up, when I was a teenager, I worked at a country and western station. This was my first job in high school. I worked at the country station. And I learned so much from the people there, the folks who would, DJs who would make a mistake at some other station in a bigger market. When they would fall and get fired, they would always come and work at Country 16 because it was the lowest station where you can go and still be employed. And I learned so much from the people who came there because they were very talented. They had been all over the place. They taught me things that I could never learn on my own. Whether I listened to them very well or not, that's another question. But I learned a lot from them, and I've always wanted, for the last 40 years, I've always wanted to write a story that was set in the early 1980s, where you were still queuing up records, where you had the dial phone, not even the tones, but you had to dial it, and what life was like back then. And so that's the hub of where all this happens, because I'm very committed to local morning radio, because that's where all this takes place. It was the old Facebook of the 1980s and 1970s, other than the CB, I guess. That's where you learned everything. So the cast of characters that I set in this country station, and all of the songs that I play, authentic songs that I got to play, the classic country, they're a part of a piece of the moon. But I knew that every really good story has not only a mystery running through it, this, where's the treasure? Who's going to find this treasure? But there's also a love story. And so a couple of years ago, more than that, I was riding on the passenger side of our 2008 Honda CRV. And my daughter, who'd gotten her license and was ready to go out on her own, was driving. And I wasn't saying anything at the time about what was happening. And she made a left turn that she shouldn't have, stopped in the middle of the road. And I can close my eyes and see this. And a car T-bones us. It was a Ford Edge, which was a little bigger than the CRV. A car T-bones us, and we're sitting there in the fallout of this accident. All the airbags have deployed. The car is totaled. I managed to get out, as the firefighters are coming. And for some reason, they took more of an interest in my daughter than me. They were tending to her, and I was the one at the point of impact. I'll never understand that. But there was a tow truck driver who came along beside us, and came along especially beside her, because she was shaking and she was so upset that she had done this thing, made a mistake. And the tow truck driver stopped and leaned down to her and kind of put his hand on her shoulder. He has seen so much of this in his career. And he said, let me tell you one thing. He said, you'll never make that mistake again. You're going to be okay. Nobody was hurt here. Nobody died here. It's going to be okay. But I bet you'll never make that mistake again. And I remembered his kindness. That stuck with me. Now, fast forward, the car was towed away to the shop and they said it's totaled. It was taken to a junkyard for sale for a few $100s. And I went over to pick up the check. And when I went over to the junkyard to pick up the check, it's kind of a little shack that was on the, cobbled together at the junkyard. Now, this is in Tucson, Arizona, where it gets 110 in the shade in the summertime. Thankfully, this was in January. But when I walked in, I saw there was an air conditioner in a window, and it had like a 2-inch gap between the top of the air conditioner and the window jamb. And I thought, in the wintertime, it's going to be cold in here, and in the summertime, it's going to be real hot in here. And there were probably 3 or 4 guys that were moving around in this little office, and one female. There was one middle-aged woman. And so that was an anomaly, and I took note of that. She was the one that was writing the checks. Evidently, the guys couldn't do that. But the thing that I remember most about that was on the shelf that she had on the bench in front of her, where she was sitting and she was writing and keeping an old computer, there was a pigeon. There was a live pigeon that was walking back and forth across the area of her desk. And I didn't ask the lady, what's that pigeon there doing there? But it was clear, and nobody else thought it was an anomaly. It's just, there's a pigeon here. It's our pet, I guess. So all of this stuff gelled in my mind, and I took the tow truck driver, his name is T.D. Lovett, and I took the woman at the junkyard, and her name is Pamela Bledsoe. So we got T.D. Lovett and Pamela Bledsoe, and Pamela is known as Pidge because of the pigeon. And I extrapolated as to how did she get this pigeon? And this was one of the first visions that I had of not vision in the, just an idea that came into my mind, like C.S. Lewis talks about the fawn at the lamppost and everything. The idea in my mind was a pigeon flying in West Virginia over the hill who hits a guy wire to the antenna, and it comes swirling down, and Pamela comes up to it and sees it and cradles it, takes it to her and puts it inside and nurses it back to health and becomes her lifelong friend. And I researched, how long do pigeons live and would this happen and all of that. So she becomes known as Pidge. That's her name. And the tow truck driver, he is her love interest, and he wants very much to love her and for it to be a long-term relationship. But Pidge holds back because she doesn't feel worthy of love. She feels a lot like that pigeon whose wing was broken, or there's something wrong with her. She looks at the pigeon in the grass and sees basically herself and all of the things that she has been through and some of the decisions that she has made. And so you've got one person who feels unworthy of love, another person who wants to love, but it's being rebuffed. And let me tell you one other story, and then I'll be quiet. My daughter was going to a community college here in Tucson, and as a part-time job, she was working at a place where you jump on the trampolines. You go in and you jump around and you bring the kids in and have fun, and hopefully don't get too many injuries. So she was at the desk one night, and there was a man there, middle-aged guy with young kids, who was just not happy with his experience. And he didn't think that he should have paid what he paid. And my daughter, Kristen, was trying to help him and calm him and, refund him what she could, but there were rules about certain things, and she couldn't give him his money back, et cetera, et cetera. And he got really mad at her. And then he looked at her and he said, what I guess was to him the worst thing that he could say to her, and that was, "This is all you'll ever do. This is all you," meaning you'll work at a trampoline place your whole life. You'll never get above this. Which, in thinking about it, it's like, that's not the worst job in the world. If that's all you ever do and you do it well, I say do whatever you do for God's glory. But he meant it at such a cutting thing that she came home and she told Andrea and me, my wife and I, about that. And my wife and me about that. Got to get the English correct. Yeah, I'll have grammar people coming out of the woodwork.
Where's your editor?
I know. Yeah, let's edit that out. So she told us that story, and I that rolled around. It was almost like a song to me. This is all you'll ever be. This is all you'll ever do. And the whole being and doing thing. And so in the story, TD, who is the tow truck driver who wants to be a DJ at the station, he does, in the morning, he does the news with Wait Evers. And he wants to do that full time, but he has to drive the tow truck. And the person who is the big wig, kind of the nemesis in the book, the antagonist, looks at TD and says, as a tow truck driver, this is all you'll ever do. You'll always have dirt under your fingernails. You'll always be dragging somebody else's car to the junkyard. You'll never get above this. And I use that pain. Rick Bragg talks about the best stories are people in pain, people in trouble. And Hemingway said, write hard and clear about what hurts. And so, the accident, the tow truck driver, the unloved woman, Proverbs talks about the unloved woman. I put all of that into the gumbo along with this radio station, and then included the pigeon and a dog with something around his neck and a boy who stutters. And and Publishers Weekly said it's the best thing that I've ever written. Maybe it is. I kind of like it. That's the story. That's a flyover of the story.
It was the short version, right?
That's right.
Well, I have to admit, I always talk about your books here at the bookstore, and I was always recommending Dogwood and Junebug to people, but then now Piece of the Moon is out. Not that I don't recommend the other ones, don't get me wrong, but now that Piece of the Moon is out, I've had to say, well, you have to read this one too. So, it's very good. I really, really enjoyed it. So, and you sum it up very well. And to add those extra stories, how unique that you could use such different experiences, positive ones and negative ones, to write something that, we've all had experiences with people like your daughter did, where, well, you're not going to amount to much, and it's like, ugh. And you're right, do it to the glory of God, no matter what you do. So thanks for including that. That's really cool. So we do have a couple questions for you. One of the first ones is they wanted to know, because you work at a country music, are you a musician too?
I am. I'm a frustrated musician.
We're losing you a little bit there, Chris.
I learned how to play guitar when I was very young. Music. Okay. Can you see me now? Can you hear me now?
There we are. Okay, we got you back.
Okay, I'm back. When I was a kid, I took piano lessons, but I was never very good because I couldn't read the music. And the reason I couldn't read the music was because my piano teacher, her name was Carrie Alice McClure, Carrie Alice taught us how to play the song first, and then how to take the notes on the page and say, okay, this is when you were playing Lightly Row, da 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 da. This is what it looks like. In my mind as a kid, I thought, I can play da 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 da. Why do I need that? So I learned how to basically play by ear. I learned all of Fury Elise by ear. I could never really read the notes, but I faked it for Carrie Alice, and it made sense to her, I guess, and Ludwig a little bit. So I learned to play the piano, but my real hope was to learn to play the guitar. And my Uncle Pooch gave me my first guitar that I really loved. It was an electric guitar. And I learned a few chords on that, and got my older brother played. And so I think he gave me a Mel Bay, chord chart. And so I'd learn from that, and I'd listen to songs, and I'd learn how to play one thing or another. And so even the book, A Piece of the Moon, there's a character in the book called Max Strum, who is a country artist he's a one-hit wonder. And the one hit that he played was A Piece of the Moon. And there's actually lyrics to this. You have it right behind you on that card. Can you show them?
You betcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just the first part of the lyric of A Piece of the Moon. And so I based the whole book around that whole idea of the song. If I could do this, I'd do, if I were a rich man, I'd buy some hope for you, and I bring you a piece of the moon. So short answer to that is, yeah, I'm a musician. I'm not very good, but I enjoy.
You don't have to be good to be a musician. I am tone deaf, so I am not. So if that helps you at all. And then, somebody obviously has read it already and says they want to know if you have a sequel planned.
Let's just get this is the first day and you already want more. That's great news. I've thought about so I don't want to give anything away, but the thread through the story that will keep you going is there's a treasure hidden.
Right.
So the question is it found? And if it's found, who finds it? And if they find it, what happens with it? You know what sudden money does. Proverbs talks about sudden money and the struggle of that. So I've thought about, if I do write a sequel, it will be, hang on just a second. No, I want to decline that. Yeah, thank you. Do you still have me? Are you still there? Okay. If I do write a sequel, it will be about the ramifications of what happens in the town and in the lives of the people that discover where the treasure is. That's all I'm going to say about that.
And I won't add anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Those would be great questions to answer.
Yeah.
If that helps you at all.
Definitely.
I have to admit, that's one of the hardest things about these things is not like asking a question about like the end of the book. So, right. So, but now I do have people that always ask this, and you have touched on it a little bit with your introduction, but how do you research a book like A Piece of the Moon? It's easy to answer the question if you do like a historical book. You research the history. We both lived through the 80s, so there's certain things we know. And by the way, it was a hoot to read some of that stuff. I had forgotten about the dial phone. My phone number when I grew up had 4 9s in it. So
wow.
Nobody ever called me. It took forever.
Yes. So, I just talked with my mother on Saturday, and she said, she reminded me of the phone that we had. You had one phone in the house. Yep. You didn't have 5 different phones. You had one phone, and it was on a wall in the kitchen. And my dad worked. Exactly. And my dad, and the thing, if you took it off there, it weighed like 50 pounds. My dad worked shift work. So he would work day shift and then evenings, and then he would work midnights and have a week off and then do the same thing. And he would do that for 30 years. So as I grew up, I didn't know, wait a minute, is daddy asleep this week? Or, is he taking a nap before he goes to work? I can't remember. And so my mother would hang her heavy overcoat over the phone, because even set at the lowest level, it would, ring so loud it would wake him up. So I can't remember your question now.
That's all right. How do you research a book?
Oh, that's it. Thank you. Well, I lived this one. I had to find out the timeline. The Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in June of 1981. I didn't remember that, but so I had to go and look that up. But I remember that experience. And the reason why that's important is that Gideon Quidley not only hides the treasure, he puts it in a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. And so they, on the morning program, to set up their Tuesday treasure hunt, they would play the theme of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Da, 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 da. And so that soundtrack had to be out by then. So I wanted it to be, authentic and real. But to be honest with you, I don't even know if they did soundtracks. It would have been on record at that point. But all of the stuff that goes into the radio station, I live. The splicing of the tape that the young man is led to, the Oak Ridge Boys and the Statler Brothers beginning in gospel music, that was all stuff that we knew because we were kind of in the biz. And playing. One of my favorite memories that I wrote about, I think it made it into the book. Sometimes it'll get edited out and I won't remember, but I think we left this in there, was the scene where on Sunday morning, the preacher comes in and in the production room is preaching. And so this actually happened to me. The worst shift that you could have at the station was Sunday mornings. For some reason, people didn't want to be there on Sunday morning. And I don't think it was because they wanted to go to church. It was because the evening before they wanted to stay out late, So I always got the Sunday morning shift. And every time the pastor would come in with his Bible, and there was one microphone that was on, and his wife would have this guitar around with the strap around, and she would sing and play at the microphone and then move back, and he would move up and he would speak. And every Sunday, by the end, at some point, he would work this in. He would say, I don't care where you are listening to me today. I don't care what you're doing. You could even be at this radio station. You need to give your heart to Jesus. So he was preaching to an audience of one, and who knows how many other people were listening at that little station. But every week he was faithful to include me in the offertory, or the invitation that he gave, and then his wife would come back up. And so I worked those types of things into the novel that were real to me in the early 1980s, late 70s.
Awesome. And then somebody did ask, and this is a great question, do you include parts of your life in every one of your books then?
I don't see how you can't. I don't see how you can write authentically about what hurts without going deeper into that. There's a book behind me. I read all of Pat Conroy's books, and there was a person who knocked on his door. She had cancer. She heard about our story from years ago, and that I had lost all of my signed Pat Conroy books. Ooh. And she knocked on his door, and she told him our story and that I'm a writer. And I think he kind of rolled his eyes, but he took pity on her because she was wearing the scarf and she was going through chemo at the time. And so he signed, for my 50th birthday, he signed to Chris, good luck in your writing life, or something like that. And then he said, go deeper, always go deeper. And that's something that he said to writers, no matter where they were. It was one of his stock phrases, to go deeper. And that's what I try to do with my stories. And I don't know how you can go deeper into the characters or the story that they're going through without going deeper into yourself, into your own life, into your own struggles. What are you afraid of? What are the doubts that you have? How can that leak onto the page? With Pidge's feeling unloved and unworthy, all of us feel that to
you still there?
Or other.
I'm kind of losing you.
And so try what I've been through. Yeah. Okay. We'll wait. Just as long as you smile, it makes sense, right?
We'll just nod and smile it. Okay, I think we got you back now. Awesome. Okay, I think we're good now. We'll see how that goes.
Okay.
So, actually, somebody would like to know, were books and reading a big part of your growing up then?
Absolutely. My mom read to me a lot. I can remember her reading the first book that I remember was a book called Freddie the Cat Who Thought He Was People. And she had this big dictionary. It was about that thick. And my brothers would say, we never guess, we always look it up. And so they would go to the dictionary and find the denotation, the dictionary definition of this word, and try to use it in a sentence. And so I grew up with words. I grew up with a love of stories. And my uncles used to tell stories at my grandmother's kitchen table. And I would listen to them, spin these yarns and think, oh, this somebody needs to hear this story. Oh, this is so funny. And this is, and what they would do is, as they would tell the story, you felt like you were part of it. You felt like you were walking up the hill, going hunting with them during the Depression, with not a gun, with only a lantern and a sack to get possums, that you were right there with them. And so I use that same idea when I write my stories. I try to make you a part of the journey that you're going on from the first page to the last.
And you do a fantastic, because I say that when anybody asks me about it. I says, I mean, I've been to West Virginia, I mean, traveling and such, but you feel like you live there with your books. And yeah, that's what makes them so special is you want it, it's like, no, I'm not visiting, I live there. So
the best compliment that I get from people is when they read it, if they live in West Virginia, they'll say, I know that person, not the specific named person, but I know a person like that. I know that that's the same characteristic. There's a fellow in the book whose name is Waite, Waite, Waite Evers. And he is basically the good guy in the story. He's just got such a good heart, and he gives everybody a second chance, even if they don't deserve it. He's a kind of a person who gives them a second chance. And I'll read a little portion of the book here in a minute that deals with some of Waite's, the way that he thinks, the way that he treats other people. In fact, if you want me to, I can do that now. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, this is from the point where Pidge comes to Waite's office at the radio station, and she is trying to ask for some help. And I got to get to my right thing over here. That's where it is. Okay. Pidge goes to Country 16 and meets Waite Evers. Here we go. Pidge had mouse brown hair she kept in a tight ponytail and a cute nose, blue eyes, and dimpled cheeks. She wore work clothes, a cotton t-shirt and jeans that looked like they were a size too big, like they were inherited, or maybe she'd shrunk since she'd bought them. It's kind of funny listening to you in person rather than through the radio, she said. Her voice was smooth and husky, radio worthy. Sometimes I hate to ruin the illusion, Waite said. People get in their head what you look like, and then they see the real thing. They always say, you don't look a thing like I thought you would. I'd rather people think I resemble Robert Redford. She smiled, and her dimples showed, and he got a vision of what she must have looked like as a child. TD's told me what kind of man you are. Really? What kind of man is that? The kind that gives the people a chance. You tell stories about the three-legged dog you had as a kid. That tells me you have a big heart. TD says it's too big. I don't think the worst thing you can do is give somebody a second chance. But you didn't come here to compliment my aorta. What can I do for you? She rubbed her hands on her dirty jeans and sat straight, like she was getting up the nerve to head toward white water in a leaky canoe. I got a situation. With TD? No. Well, I got that situation too, I guess. You got a lot of situations. I reckon. The one I'm here for is a relative who's living with me. He's 15. I agreed to take him in. That's kind of you. What's his name? Clayton. By Clay. He's not a bad kid, but he's made mistakes. And there's a reason you're telling me this video. He's been complaining that he can't hear other stations because we live so close to the antenna. I got to thinking maybe if he got a glimpse of what goes on here, how it all works. You mean a tour? Sure, that'd be nice. She thought a moment and leaned forward. I don't want to ask too much, but I thought maybe there's something around the building he could do. Cut the grass, take out the trash. I think your idea is good. I'll find something for him to do. Really? Waite leaned back in his chair. I made a promise to the Lord a while ago. I said, whoever you bring through the front door of this station, who's down and out or struggling, if you show them the way to Emmaus, I'll do all I can to help. I've walked that same road he has, Pidge. There's something else you ought to know. He has a real bad stutter, and I don't know how to help him. I stuttered when I was younger. Really? I'd go for breakfast at the diner, and by the time I ordered, they were serving lunch. Half the problem is he can't hear what he'd sound like if he spoke unbroken. I might be able to help. There's something else, Pidge said. He's got an injury. Got cut right here. She pointed to her wrist and stared at it. And there's a bunch of hospital bills. The bills come as a package deal. She nodded. Maybe you ought to hunt for old Gideon's treasure. That's where I'll stop.
Oh, go on. I could have listened. We should have just done that for a whole hour. You should have just read to us. That was beautiful. And I don't know. There's a lot about your books I love, but the way you describe your characters, you have said people from West Virginia say, oh, I know that person. I've said that, and I live in Michigan, so
right.
That's a gift you give your readers, that your characters are people we know, and even strive to be. Thank you for that. And thank you for reading it. That's a different way of looking at the book. And I don't know, when you hear it in the author's voice, there's something different. So thank you.
As I'm reading that there, the emotion came too. And it's Jerry Jenkins always said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And as I'm reading that, it's like, I can't manipulate how you will feel as you read that. I can't do that. If I'm narrating the book, I can put my feeling into it.
Right.
But I just think of the longing of Pidge for this teenager. One of the things that she says in the book is, how do you give somebody something you don't have? How do you love? She's never had a child. She's never had somebody that she's had to love, and she's never had that experience, and she's never been loved that way. So how do you give what you've never had yourself? Is a real deep thought, and brings me back, dragging, kicking and screaming to the grace of God, and because it's only the grace of God that fills in the gaps and the cracks in our souls that way. So thanks for letting me read that.
Oh, you're very welcome. And like I said, we could have listened to a whole hour. I know I speak for everybody listening. So, and I gotta say, I loved Clayton. There was something about him that was just so relatable as a teenager. Now, obviously, I'm not a teenager, but I can remember those days where high school is brutal, and then if you have a thing that kids could latch onto, so to include that, especially in an adult book like that, it was, again, it just was such a neat part of the story, and my heart just bled for him. So, yeah, that's quite a thing.
That's it. That's what you want. When I read To Kill a Mockingbird, you talked about, books that you read when you were a kid. To Kill a Mockingbird was the book that my 7th grade teacher, Mrs. D. Wilson, gave me a reading list. And at the very top of was To Kill a Mockingbird. And she said, I think you're ready for that now. And I read it that summer of the between seventh and eighth grade, I think it was. And it was just this world expanding, eye opening, seeing everything from Scout's perspective and what was done with those words. It was like I was part of the story. I was in that. And the injustice of Tom Robinson and how can they do this? And Atticus saying, they've done it before and they'll do it again. This is Makeham's, general disease that's here, and I want to keep kids from it. There's just so much going on in that story that was, and I've gone back every few years and I've read it again, and it's new every time. I find something new every time. But the hook of it is, you are in that treehouse when Dill shows up in the patch. You are there on the porch with the Radleys looking in the window when Boo comes around. You are dressed in the ham. You were there going to the the AME church with them when Calpurnia takes it's all there. And that's when I read that book, I thought, I didn't consciously think it at the time, but I thought, I want to do the same thing for somebody else that Harper Lee did for me when she wrote that book. I want to do that same thing. I want to take somebody where I have been and show them what I have seen. And it may not be the best book in the world or the deepest book or whatever, but it'll be uniquely from me. And so that's what I've tried to do with all of my writing, and especially with A Piece of the Moon.
And brilliant. It was, and I love the word pictures you used there about To Kill a Mockingbird, and then, how you wanted to emulate that. So, because we have lots of people that listen to these that are writers and are interested in writing. So, and that goes with, some of the questions that they ask, like one is like, do you work on like one book at a time, or are you constantly working ahead on the next book when this one is releasing?
I work since we have 9 kids. I work as fast as I can because they like to eat. But a lot of my kids there's only 4 living at home now, but we have 2 dogs, so I got to keep busy. I usually work best with one, just focused on one thing at a time. But I have worked on multiple projects. Stephen King talks about in On Writing. Stephen King talked about he would work on his main story in the morning, and then in the afternoon he'd work on his toy train. He'd be kind of working a little bit on that, but he'd get back to the main thing, and then the toy train at some point would become the main thing that he would work on. But I usually try to work on just one story at a time, but at the same time, jotting down. I've had great ideas when I'm working on the one thing. I'll have some great ideas about the next thing, and instead of going and spending days and days on it, I'll just jot ideas down in a file over there and keep working with that. And wait until I finish this and then move on to the next thing. But it's easier for me to work on one main project and then be noodling some others as the next ones.
Well, that makes sense. So, somebody wants to know, have you ever written any series using the same characters throughout the series? I mean, I think the Left Behind and the kids' books, you had that, where you had repeat. But I don't know that you had any series, so to speak, in adult.
Well, there was a book that you mentioned, Junebug.
Yep.
Junebug is about a little girl who rides around with her dad, or a man who says he's her dad, in an RV around the country, and they park in Walmart parking lots and stay overnight. And one day she walks into Walmart, looks up at the missing children posters, and sees herself. And so that, at 8 or 9, sends her on a quest of, who am I? Which is one of the basic questions in fiction. That's the first page. The rest of the book is, who is she and who is he? When I wrote the book Almost Heaven, about a man named Billy Allman, Natalie, who is Junebug, shows up in that book with Billy about halfway through. And I hoped it would be a real surprise to readers who had read Junebug. So there's two books. There's also a book that I wrote, Every Waking Moment, about a girl who is on the Asperger's, has Asperger's, and she shows up. The sequel to her story shows up in a book called Looking Into You. So there's four books where it's the same characters with a sequel to it, and there may be more. The Left Behind Kids, all of those had mostly the same characters until they died, which had to happen in just about all of the books. And Jerry and I wrote the Red Rock Mysteries, and the Red Rock Mysteries, many of the same characters are in each of those books. And I'll tell you something about that was really neat about the Left Behind Kids books. We had to write these fast. I was writing 4 books of the children's books to every adult book that Jerry was writing with the same timeline. So the adult book had a timeline that was going on in the tribulation, and each of the 4 kids' books written after that would take a part of that. And so what Dr. LaHaye said was, here's what I want. I want any kid to be able to pick up book number 1, book number 13, book number 35, or number 40, and be able to read an authentic, reproducible conversion. Meaning we have to get somebody to become a Christian in every book in the series and make it, and my job was to make it authentic and not shoehorned in there. And so that was that was not the easiest thing that I ever had to do, but the payoff of that was that Jerry and Dr. LaHaye especially got letters from adults for the adult series, but from kids who said, when Vicky prayed, I prayed. When Judd prayed, I prayed. And what more can you want, from the story that's coming from your head onto the page?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes we don't remember that part of it. I mean, Christian fiction's a unique little world anyways, but then, to have those, those types of stories, that's wonderful. I mean, it kind of makes you choke up a little bit. So, but that's neat. Thanks for sharing that. So, and somebody wants to know, and, this is a pretty simple question, but are any of your children thinking of being writers? Or do they write?
My kids are really good writers, and they're good readers too, and they read widely. My son, who's in his mid-20s, he'll suggest books to my wife and me. I got it right that time. And the way you remember that grammatically is you take my wife out, and with my son suggests it to me or to I. No, it's me. Easy to remember. And he suggested this. Now I can't remember. It's by John Williams. It was written. It's kind of a classic, but Stoner is the name of it, and it's just the life story. It's a very there's no car crashes or anything like that. It's just a very literary look at a guy who grows up on a farm, and he goes to school, and he takes an English class, and he becomes an English professor, and then what happens with him for the rest of his life. I'm just a quarter of the way through that. But I contend if you are a good writer, you're going to be a good reader. Not a fast reader, because I was a very slow reader. When I was a kid, it would take me weeks to finish a book, and it still takes me a lot longer than my wife. My wife can boom, 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 and she's done, and she's got it. For me, it takes me a lot longer to read, but I contend that to really write well, you have to read well, meaning that reading has captured you, and you want to keep doing it because it opens up a new world, or you see something different that you'd never seen before, or you're analyzing, how did this writer do this in that, how did John Grisham do that, or how did Michael Connelly do that, and take me and grab me so well in the first page there and drag me all the way through that. How did Francine Rivers do that with Redeeming Love? I want to emulate that, so a good, I don't know that my daughter was just saying the other day, she's in her 30s, and she said, Dad, I've had this idea for this children's book, and she told it to me, and she told it to me 10 years ago. She said, I'm still working on this thing. How do I do this? And so we were having a conversation, what's publication look like these days, and how do you get noticed when you don't have a platform and all of that. So yeah, I think maybe one day they'll catch the bug.
That's awesome. So you were talking about being a reader. So what is on your reading pile now? Or what are you looking forward to even reading? I mean, what's coming that you're like, oh, I've heard about this and I can't wait to read it.
I've had my head down so much into the project that I'm working on, and then letting people know about A Piece of the Moon, that I don't know what's coming. I'll find something. I just downloaded a Kindle book the other day called My Salinger Year. It just looked interesting to me, and I thought, oh, I'd like to read that. I mentioned Stoner. I just reread Pat Conroy's The Death of Santini, and walked through that, the end of his dad's life. It's really a look at Pat Conroy's life. And now, after he has been dead for 5 years, I think now, to read that through the lens of his own demise was really poignant. There were moments there. I always wanted to ask him, was it worth it making your family mad at you? His sister Carol wouldn't speak to him for a long time, and he was estranged from, I think, one of his daughters was gone for a long time, and his other family members, toward the end, they kind of saw his.
See if we catch up with you again. Uh-oh. Okay, he's going to come back in a second here. And I agree with the great Santini there. That is a awesome book. So are you back, or do we have no volume yet?
I just unmuted myself. Okay, there I am. Woo. I always wanted to ask him, and I saw him twice in a book signing thing, and I never got to do that. But was it worth it, making all those people mad at you? His dad was mad at him for Santini, but in the end, his dad loved it and embraced it, So I've never wanted to hurt people by including them in my books, by taking their lives and putting them out. I've always tried to be very careful about that. But at the same time, I think there's room to do composite characters and others that show a real person that you can identify with.
Yeah, and I agree. And yeah, there's just a lot you can do that, doesn't include something mean. So, but now, of course, we're all going to run back and read To Kill a Mockingbird too, from your perspective on it. So that I enjoyed reading it when I read it. I think I read it in high school, though. I think it was 9th grade. But as we're wrapping up tonight,
you've got to read it again.
Yes, I'll have to do that because I loved it the first time. One of the few books that I read that was required in high school that I actually really enjoyed. So the other ones, like, well, I won't mention them because that's not fair, but it was like, oh, I don't want to read that ever again. So anyways, but before we wrap up, what are you working on now? Does it have a title that you can share and or a release date-ish?
No, I mean, no, and I'll be very honest with you. There is a story that I've been working on since for about a year now, in the idea stage, and it's the perspective of a man with Alzheimer's who wants to protect his family from his Alzheimer's, and his name is Grayson Hayes. And as I'm writing it, titles come to me every day. Well, that could be, those two words there go together. But the title that I have stuck on is Saving Grayson. And I like the way that comes to, like, saving grace, but it's Saving Grayson. And it's the lengths to which a family will go to love someone who can't love them anymore, and the struggle to love well. What does love look like for a person with Alzheimer's and dementia? And what does love look like for the people who surround that main character? And I'm 120,000 words into it now. And so I hope you'll be able to read this, whether that's the title when it comes out or not. I really hope that you'll be able to experience that, and it will be not a sad book. I mean, there's a lot of real heart struggles with that disease, but there's a lot of hope as well. And I want to bring that in the middle of the struggle. I'll leave you with this quote. Radio Pastor Donald Cole used to always say, the struggle is not evidence of failure. Struggle is an evidence of life. And that goes for A Piece of the Moon. And it goes for everything that I write as I look back on it, that if you are struggling, it doesn't mean you're failing at life. It means that God's grace is penetrating you deep in a transformative way. He wants to transform you from the inside out. So take the struggle as evidence that he is at work rather than evidence that you are failing.
I love that. And you know what? I can't think of a better way to end the evening. That is a great thought for all of us all the time. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for joining us. You've got an open invite to come into Baker Book House anytime you want. We would love to host you here, but if nothing else, come in and visit, and we can show you our digs here, and you can see where you were talked to from. So, but we would love to have you here. But
I'll bring my hand sanitizer when I come, and I'll use it. Okay.
Yeah, just spray everybody with it.
Thank you so much. I've loved the evening, and thank you for watching tonight.
I sure appreciate you joining us, Chris, and everybody that listened in on us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You can find Chris's books on our website, bakerbookhouse.com. And thank you again, and we'll all have a good night. Bye now.
Good night.